What if the only person who saw your worth was the one everyone else abandoned? I never expected my mother-in-law's last breath to unravel betrayals, reveal hidden secrets, and change my life forever.
My name is Eleanor, and this is the story of how grief uncovered a legacy of strength I never knew I had. Before we begin, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because this journey is one you won't want to miss. Your support helps us bring more powerful, true life stories like this one to light.
The hospital room was colder than I remembered, though maybe that was just me. The overhead lights buzzed softly, casting pale shadows across the white walls. Sterile, quiet, too quiet. I'd always imagined death would come with drama. The frantic beep of machines, the rush of nurses, the metallic clatter of carts rolling in as doctors called out orders. Instead, it came with a silence so heavy it pressed against my chest like a stone. My name is Eleanor, and I stood alone, watching as Catherine, the woman who had shaped my life in ways I still didn't understand, took her final breath. My mother-in-law, my reluctant teacher in patience, my quiet critic, my complicated friend. Her chest rose once, faintly, then stilled. Her lips parted, and then closed again as though she were exhaling one last secret into the air. The world didn't end. No alarm sounded. Life continued just outside that room. The shuffle of shoes in the hallway, the distant murmur of visitors, the occasional burst of laughter from children who didn't yet know how to fear loss. But inside, I felt a hollow ache. A space where something vital had slipped away. I tightened my grip around her cooling hand, my thumb brushing against the thin skin stretched across bone. Even in her final moments, Catherine had managed to look dignified. Her hair, gray and thin, had been brushed by the nurses, her hands folded neatly as though she had prepared herself for this long goodbye. Her face was calm, untroubled, freed from the pain that had twisted it for weeks. And yet, no one was there but me. Not Colin, my husband, who had promised to come when I called. Not Nora, his sharp-tongued sister, who had texted once weeks ago and then vanished into silence. No cousins, no friends, no neighbors. Just me, the daughter-in-law who never quite cracked the code to Catherine's heart, sitting vigil in a room that felt as though it had been holding its breath right alongside her. I'd been there for 3 days, stretched across the stiff vinyl chair by her bed, dozing when exhaustion caught me, waking when Catherine stirred. My phone buzzed constantly, emails from my boss, reminders from clients, a life waiting impatiently outside these walls, but never once did it light up with Colin's name. I had called him, texted him, left voicemails that cracked under the weight of desperation. "She's fading fast," I'd said in one message, my voice trembling. "Please, come." But the doorway had remained empty. Now, with Catherine gone, I kept glancing at the door anyway. Hope was a stubborn thing. I kept expecting to see Colin's familiar frame leaning against the wall, or Nora's sharp voice slicing through the silence, but nothing came. Nothing but the quiet hum of the vents and the distant cheer from the next room where someone had lived to fight another day. The contrast was brutal. There, joy. Here, silence. A gentle voice broke through my thoughts. "Are you okay, Eleanor?" I turned. A nurse stood in the doorway, her clipboard tucked against her chest. Her eyes were soft, carrying the kind of sympathy that comes from seeing too much death. She had been kind these past few days, checking on me more often than she needed to, pretending not to notice my red-rimmed eyes or the way I clutched my phone like a lifeline. I nodded, but the truth stuck in my throat. I called them again. My husband, his sister, they said they'd come.
The nurse's face softened further, but she didn't answer. She didn't have to. We both knew this wasn't about traffic or meetings or bad timing. This was about choices. Through the wall, a muffled cheer rose up. Someone else was going home. I pressed Catherine's hand against my cheek,
the chill sinking into me. Why her? Why like this? She had been a librarian, a woman who spent her life surrounded by stories and people, a woman who gave warmth freely to strangers, but who had been abandoned by her own children. And now she left this world with only me to witness it. I should call the funeral home, I mumbled, fumbling for my phone with hands that didn't feel steady. 3 missed calls from my boss, none from Colin, none from Nora. The nurse stepped closer, her hand brushing my arm gently. "The doctor will handle the paperwork first," she said. Then her expression shifted. "And there's something else. Catherine asked me to give this to you." She handed me a sealed envelope, its edges slightly creased, my name written in Catherine's sharp, elegant handwriting. My breath caught. "For me?" The nurse nodded. She was very clear about it. She made me promise. My hands trembled as I took it. Catherine and I had never been close, not the way I'd always hoped. She had been polite, even kind, teaching me how to prune her roses, sharing cups of tea in her tidy apartment. But there was always a wall between us, invisible yet unyielding. I never knew how to climb it. What could she possibly have to say now, when it was too late to ask her why? I slid my finger beneath the flap, careful not to tear the paper. Inside was a small rusted key taped to a folded sheet. Below it, an address I didn't recognize, somewhere out in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And then, in Catherine's precise script, a single line: "They never loved me. Now they will learn what it means to be forgotten." The words sent a shiver racing down my spine. I stared at them, my pulse loud in my ears. "Is everything okay?" the nurse asked gently, her voice pulling me back. "Yes," I lied, quickly folding the paper before she could see. Just her final thoughts. But inside me, something shifted, a spark, a flicker of something heavier, curiosity, maybe even resolve. Because Catherine hadn't just left me her last words, she'd left me a mystery, a key, and perhaps a truth I wasn't ready for. That night, I didn't sleep in the vinyl chair. I didn't cry into the stiff hospital blanket. Instead, I sat awake staring at the key in my hand, feeling the weight of it. The key wasn't just metal, it was a question, and I knew I wouldn't rest until I found the answer.
The key was heavier than it looked. I kept turning it over in my palm as though its weight might reveal its secrets. Rust clung to its grooves, rough against my fingertips, and yet there was something deliberate about it. Something almost ceremonial. Catherine hadn't just left me a token, she'd left me a map. The next morning, sunlight broke across Asheville in pale streaks, but the hospital lingered in my mind like a shadow. I couldn't bring myself to return home, not yet. Not to Colin, who dismissed his mother's life as though she were an inconvenience. Not to the silence that now filled our marriage, brittle and sharp. Instead, I packed a bag, slipped Catherine's envelope into my purse, and typed the unfamiliar address into my phone's GPS. The voice on the screen directed me out of the city and into the hills, Asheville's lively streets, cafes with steaming mugs on tables, artists arranging canvases on sidewalks, tourists strolling with cameras, faded into the rearview mirror. Ahead, the road curved and narrowed, climbing into the spine of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air grew cooler as I ascended, the windows down just enough to let in the scent of pine and earth. Sunlight speared through the canopy, breaking into shards across the asphalt. Every mile deepened the sense that I was crossing into another world, one that existed just out of reach of daily life. I replayed Catherine's words in my head over and over. "They never loved me. Now they will learn what it means to be forgotten."
It wasn't just bitterness. It was a statement of intent. Catherine, quiet and composed even in pain, had carried something sharp inside her all along, and she had chosen me of all people, to hold it after she was gone. The road eventually forked, my GPS instructing me to take a gravel path almost hidden behind overgrown blackberry bushes. My tires crunched over loose stones as the forest closed in around me, branches reaching overhead like clasped hands. At the end of the path, a rusted iron gate hung half open. I stopped the car, the engine ticking in the silence. The gate looked as though it hadn't been touched in years, its hinges groaning with the slightest breeze. Beyond it, nestled against the slope of the mountain, was a small cottage. My breath caught. It wasn't
grand, not the kind of house you'd expect to find hidden in the hills. Its white paint peeled to reveal weathered gray wood beneath. Wild roses climbed one wall, their thorns snagging the frame of a shutter that hung crooked. The porch sagged slightly at one corner, and moss clung stubbornly to the stone steps. Forgotten, abandoned, and yet alive. Something about it felt as though it had been waiting. I slid the key from my pocket, its cold bite grounding me. The lock resisted at first, then turned with a soft click. The door creaked open on rusted hinges, exhaling a puff of stale air that carried the faintest trace of lavender. Inside, dust motes floated in beams of light that slipped through cracked shutters. The air was heavy with the scent of old paper, wood polish, and something else, something floral and ghostly, like Catherine's perfume. My footsteps echoed as I stepped across the threshold, careful, reverent.
Books lined one wall, their spines faded but lovingly arranged. A stack of photo albums sat on a coffee table, their covers cracked with age. On the kitchen table lay another envelope, this one larger, addressed in Catherine's careful handwriting, to be opened upon my death. Clara, my lawyer, will explain. I froze, my pulse hammering. This wasn't just a forgotten cottage. This was Catherine's sanctuary. But why keep it secret? Why let her children, Colin and Nora, believe she lived her final years in a sterile apartment near the assisted living center? Why entrust it to me? I left the envelope untouched, the weight of its meaning too much for the moment. Instead, I drifted deeper into the house. The floorboards groaned beneath my steps, each sound echoing like a sigh. A chair sat near the window, its cushions worn and indented as though Catherine had spent long hours there. Beside it, a row of leather-bound journals filled a bookshelf. Their spines bore years written in her neat script. Curiosity pulled me closer. I reached for the most recent, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting before I opened it. The pages crackled. Inside, Catherine's voice came alive. It has been a decade since my husband passed. Colin called today asking for money for a new car. I sent it, foolish as ever, hoping he'd visit in return. He didn't. I sank into the chair, the journal heavy in my hands. My throat tightened as I read entry after entry. Called Colin 3 times this week. No answer. When he finally picked up, I could hear a baseball game in the background. He said he was too busy. That was spring. It's fall now. Still no visit. Another entry. Nora came by once, only to borrow earrings. When I told her I wasn't ready to part with them, she called me selfish. Left within 10 minutes. The house feels colder without her voice. Sharp as it is, I closed the journal, my hands trembling. The Catherine I had known had always been gracious, reserved, but here, in her private words, was a woman abandoned, overlooked, dismissed by the very people who should have loved her most. I thought of Colin, sprawled across the couch at home, scrawling his phone as though the world owed him something. I thought of Nora's voice, always sharp, always judging. My stomach twisted with guilt. I had been there, yes, but never enough. I had mistaken her quiet for contentment, when it had been loneliness all along. The cottage was no mere retreat. It was Catherine's truth, her final rebellion. I set the journal back in its place and turned toward the kitchen. The envelope still waited, its presence filling the room like a heartbeat. I wasn't ready to open it yet, not without Catherine's words echoing in my mind. Not without first understanding the woman behind them. So I sat in her chair, staring out the window at the wild roses climbing the walls, and whispered into the silence, "I'm here now, Catherine. I'll listen." The house creaked in reply, as though it believed me.
The cottage followed me home. Not physically, of course. The wild roses and dusty shelves stayed rooted in the Blue Ridge. But the memory clung to me like smoke. Catherine's journals weighed heavy in my mind, her loneliness seeping into my bones. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her handwriting. They never loved me. Now they will learn what it means to be forgotten. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a walnut-paneled office in downtown Asheville. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Heavy curtains muted the sunlight. A single orchid sat on the windowsill,
a splash of fragile beauty in the otherwise severe room. Clara, Catherine's lawyer, was a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried quiet authority. She sat at the head of the polished oak table, a leather portfolio open before her. Her presence radiated the kind of steadiness that comes from years of seeing families torn apart by money. To her left sat Colin, my husband. He slouched in his chair, restless, tapping his foot as though this meeting was an inconvenience wedged between golf games and late-night drinks. He hadn't spoken to me on the drive over, and the anger that simmered in me since Catherine's death threatened to boil over. Next to him was Nora. Sharp-featured, arms crossed, her expression pinched with irritation. She'd arrived late, muttering something about traffic, her phone buzzing constantly in her hand. Her eyes flicked to me now and then, cool and assessing, as though I were a stranger intruding on her family's business. Across from us sat two older women, Ruth and Vivian, Catherine's church friends. Their presence confused me. They clasped their hands tightly, exchanging uncertain glances, as though they had stumbled into a battlefield they hadn't expected to cross.
The tension in the room was palpable. Clara cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her tone calm but firm. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Catherine Whitmore, revised 2 months ago." Colin leaned back, yawning. Nora rolled her eyes. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding. 2 months ago. That was after Catherine's diagnosis. After the hospital visits had begun, after the loneliness had deepened. Clara's voice carried through the silence. "To my son, Colin, I leave my forgiveness, though you have not earned it." Colin's head snapped up. "What?" "To my daughter, Nora, I leave my wedding band, which you once admired. May it remind you of promises unkempt." Nora's face flushed. Her crossed arms tightened as her foot stopped tapping. "To my friends Ruth and Vivian, I leave my gratitude for your kindness in my final year and $5,000 each." Ruth and Vivian exchanged startled looks, their hands tightening around each other's. Clara paused, her eyes scanning the room before reading the final clause. "And to my daughter-in-law, Eleanor, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, including my residence at 47 Maple Ridge, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, insurance policies, and personal possessions." The silence shattered. "What?" Nora's voice sliced through the air, sharp as broken glass. Colin shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. "This is a mistake. Eleanor barely knew her. She couldn't leave it all to her." Clara didn't flinch. She slid a document across the table. "There is no mistake. Catherine was of sound mind when she revised her will. This was confirmed by a psychiatric evaluation performed 1 week prior. I also have a video statement from her, should the court require proof." Colin's face flushed red, his hands clenching at his sides. He turned to me, his eyes blazing. "You knew, didn't you? You manipulated her, took advantage when she was sick." My stomach twisted, guilt and shock colliding inside me. I shook my head, my voice barely steady. I had no idea. But then, in the silence that followed, a memory surfaced. Early spring, Catherine asking me to drive her downtown for an appointment. She'd claimed it was for her medication plan. I'd waited in the car, never suspecting she was meeting Clara instead. The weight of it pressed into me. Catherine had planned this, chosen me, not by accident. Nora's laugh was bitter, sharp. The perfect daughter-in-law act, huh? Quiet cups of tea, trimming roses in the garden. You played your part well, Eleanor. Her words stung. I had tried. God, I had tried. To bridge the wall between Catherine and me, to prove I belonged in this family. But it had never been an act. And now, here I was, caught in their fury. Clara's voice cut through the rising storm. "The cottage is valued at approximately $300,000. The investment accounts total $270,000. The insurance policies are worth $150,000. Catherine lived modestly, but she invested wisely. The numbers felt surreal, almost meaningless. To me, the value wasn't in the money. It was in the trust Catherine had placed in me. But to Colin and Nora, it was a betrayal carved in stone. Colin leaned forward, his voice low and venomous. "You think this makes you part of this family? You're nothing. You were nothing to her." I flinched, my hands trembling against the smooth surface of the table. But Clara's steady gaze met mine, anchoring me. "She chose you, Eleanor," Clara said softly, not just as her beneficiary, but as her voice. Colin's mouth twisted into a snarl. "This isn't over." He stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hall. Nora followed, her eyes blazing with hatred, her phone already in her hand, no doubt calling a lawyer. Ruth and Vivian remained seated, their faces a mix of sadness and quiet respect. Ruth reached across the table, her hand brushing mine gently. "She saw you," she whispered, "even when they didn't. Remember that." Tears blurred my vision. When the room had emptied, Clara handed me another envelope. This one smaller, sealed with Catherine's elegant script. "She asked me to give you this privately. She said you'd understand." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Catherine's handwriting, precise and deliberate. "Forgive no one. Let them beg, let them kneel, and when they do, smile, turn, and walk away." The words burned into me, heavy and electric. I folded the letter carefully, sliding it into my purse, my heart pounding. For the first time since Catherine's death, I felt something stir inside me, a quiet fire, sharp and unyielding. This wasn't just about inheritance.
The house felt colder than usual when I walked through the front door that night. It wasn't the temperature, it was something deeper, the way silence clung to the walls. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful, but charged, like the stillness before a storm. Colin was sprawled across the couch, his phone glowing in his hand. A half-empty glass of whiskey on the coffee table. The faint smell of takeout hung in the air. Greasy cardboard boxes stacked carelessly near the trash. He didn't look up when I entered. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice casual, almost too casual. "Did you grab groceries? We're out of milk." The words hit me like a slap. Milk? That was what he thought mattered right now? Milk, when his mother had been buried only hours ago? Milk, when she had left him nothing but her forgiveness? "She died today," I said, my voice flat, brittle. "Catherine, your mother." His thumb froze mid-scroll. Slowly, he set the phone down and turned to look at me, his expression blank, unreadable. "Oh," he said after a beat. "When did that happen?" "This afternoon." My throat tightened. "You'd know if you'd answered your phone." He shifted, uncomfortable, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I was slammed with meetings. You know how Mom was. Not easy." I gripped the edge of the counter until the wood bit into my palms. "She was your mother, Colin, and she was alone." He didn't answer. His eyes darted back to his phone, as though the conversation was already over in his mind. The anger that had simmered inside me for days surged to the surface. "Do you even care? She begged for you, wrote about you, and all you gave her was silence." His jaw tightened. "Don't twist this, Eleanor. You don't know what it was like growing up with her. She was controlling. Always had to be the center of attention." I blinked, stunned. "Controlling? She was dying, Colin. She just wanted you there." He poured himself another drink, the ice clinking against the glass. "You wouldn't understand." For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as my husband, not as the man I had once believed in, but as Catherine's son, entitled, detached, a man who chose himself over everyone else. I thought of the journals I had read in the cottage, Catherine's neat handwriting documenting the loneliness, the unanswered calls, the gifts sent into silence. Colin had become the echo of her pain. "I went to the cottage," I said suddenly. That got his attention. His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "What cottage?" "Her real home. The one she never told you about. She left it to me." His face darkened. "You've been sneaking around, haven't you? Going through her things, digging where you don't belong?" "She left it to me," I repeated, my voice steady. "She chose me." The glass slammed against the table, whiskey sloshing onto the wood. "She was manipulated by you. You wanted her money, her house, and you got it." I took a step back, my heart racing, but I didn't flinch. "No, she saw me, Colin. She trusted me, something you and Nora never gave her." His eyes blazed with fury, but beneath it, I saw something else. Fear, not grief, not regret. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing the narrative he had spun for years. "I won't let you destroy this family."
family, he spat. I almost laughed, the sound sharp in my throat. This family? You destroyed it long before I ever came along.
I left him in the living room, storming upstairs to pack a bag. My hands trembled as I stuffed clothes into a suitcase, but my resolve was steady. I couldn't stay here. Not in this house filled with his lies, his indifference. Not with the echo of Catherine's words pressing against me. Forgive no one. Let them beg, let them kneel. By the time I came back downstairs, he was standing in the kitchen, his shoulders tense, his glass refilled. "Where are you going?" he demanded. "To the cottage," I said. "I'm moving there, permanently." His mouth twisted. "You can't be serious." "I am." I pushed past him, the suitcase handle clutched tightly in my grip. "We'll settle the rest through lawyers." "Divorce?" His voice cracked, disbelief flashing across his face. "Yes," I said simply. His expression crumbled, anger warring with shock. "Eleanor, don't do this. You're overreacting." But I was already at the door, Catherine's key heavy in my pocket, her letter burning in my mind. I didn't look back. The cottage welcomed me like an old friend. The air inside still smelled faintly of lavender, the dust motes swirling in the dim light. I set my suitcase down by the door, my chest heaving with exhaustion, relief, fear, and something else, freedom. I wandered to the kitchen table, where Catherine's envelope still waited. My fingers brushed across its surface, but I didn't open it yet, not tonight. Instead, I pulled another journal from the shelf and sank into her chair by the window. Outside, the wild roses swayed gently in the night breeze, their petals glowing faintly in the moonlight. I flipped through the pages, Catherine's voice rising up to meet me. Christmas alone again. Set the table for 4 out of habit. Colin didn't call. Nora texted, said she was busy with her boyfriend's family. I reheated soup and pretended it was enough. My throat tightened, tears slipping down my cheeks. She had been abandoned, betrayed by her own children, and yet she had built this sanctuary, a place filled with stories, memories, and truth, a place she had chosen to give to me. For the first time since her death, I felt something shift inside me. Not just grief, not just anger, but resolve. I closed the journal, whispering into the silence, "I won't waste what you gave me, Catherine. I promise." The cottage creaked in reply, its floorboards sighing like a voice finally heard. The days after the will reading unfolded like a storm rolling in from the mountains, slow at first, then sudden, sharp, and unrelenting. Colin was the first to shift. He had gone from furious in Clara's office to strangely attentive at home. Too attentive. He cooked dinner, something he hadn't done in years. He left flowers on the counter, pale lilies that filled the house with their sweet, cloying scent. His voice softened. His touch lingered on my shoulder, as though we had never argued. But beneath the gestures was calculation. I saw it in the way his eyes lingered on the cottage key when I left it on the table. I heard it in the way he asked, "So, how are you holding up?" as though rehearsing lines for an audience. It wasn't grief, it was strategy. Nora, meanwhile, went for the throat. She filed a legal challenge within a week, claiming Catherine had been manipulated, her mind clouded by illness. Her lawyer, a jittery man with a nervous tie, argued in his filings that Catherine's emotional vulnerability made her easy prey. The first time I saw the papers, my hands shook. Not because I feared losing the case. Clara had already assured me that Catherine's psychiatric evaluation and recorded statements were ironclad, but because it confirmed how little Nora had changed. Even in Catherine's death, she wanted to strip her of dignity and rewrite the truth. I spent more nights at the cottage, unable to breathe in the same house as Colin. The cottage was dusty, drafty, and unpolished, but it held something the house never had: honesty. Each night I pulled another journal from the shelf, Catherine's voice unfolding in neat lines of ink. "The silence in this house is loud. Colin said he'd call on Sunday. He didn't. Nora stopped by for 5 minutes last week, asked about earrings again. I pretended not to notice her eyes on the lockbox." Another entry. "Doctors say it's time for hospice. Colin laughed when I mentioned it, said I was exaggerating. He hasn't seen the scans. He doesn't want to. I think he wants me to disappear quietly, like an obligation crossed off a list. I would close the journals with trembling hands, anger bubbling hot and sharp beneath my ribs. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was rage. Rage for Catherine, for myself, for all the years wasted keeping the peace in a family that had never truly wanted me. One night, as rain drummed against the roof, I pulled out the second envelope Clara had given me after the will reading. I had tucked it away in my purse, unable to face it until now. My fingers broke the seal. Inside, on Catherine's stationery, was a single paragraph. Forgive no one. Let them beg. Let them kneel. And when they do, smile, turn, and walk away. The words echoed through me. They weren't bitter. They were liberating. Catherine hadn't been asking me to carry her anger. She had been giving me permission to shed my own chains, to stop excusing Colin's neglect, to stop bending under Nora's sharpness, to stop apologizing for existing. When the court hearing came, I walked into the courthouse steadier than I'd ever felt. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and dust, the benches creaking under the weight of spectators. Nora sat at the plaintiff's table, her lawyer whispering furiously in her ear. Colin sat behind her, arms crossed, his gaze sliding over me with something between hostility and desperation.
Clara sat beside me, calm as ever, her files stacked neatly in front of her. "Breathe," she whispered, sliding a hand over mine. "You're not alone." Nora's lawyer began with fire, his voice rising as he painted me as a manipulator, a schemer who had wormed her way into Catherine's final months. I stole glances at Nora, her chin high, her lips curved into a faint, cruel smile. Then Clara stood. Her voice was even, deliberate, her words sharp as a scalpel. She presented Catherine's psychiatric evaluation, signed and notarized. She played audio recordings of Catherine describing her visits, or lack thereof, from her children. Nora's face paled as her mother's voice filled the courtroom. Nora came by today, first time in months. She scrolled her phone while I tried to tell her about my scans. When I said I was scared, she called me dramatic and left. Gasps rippled through the room. Colin's mask cracked too, his face shifting as though the truth had finally cut through the performance. He avoided my eyes, his jaw set tight. By the time Clara finished, the case had collapsed. The judge dismissed Nora's challenge in under an hour, ordering her to pay court costs. Nora's shoulders slumped, her sharp edges dulled by defeat. Colin's glare followed me out of the courtroom, heavy with unspoken promises of revenge. But I no longer feared him. That night, I sat in the cottage with Catherine's journals spread across the table. The rain had stopped, the night air cool and sweet. I lit a single candle, the flame flickering against the walls. "You were right," I whispered into the quiet. "They never loved you, but they can't erase you. Not anymore." The floorboards creaked in reply, as though Catherine herself had nodded in agreement. And for the first time, I believed I wasn't just surviving this storm, I was beginning to claim it.
Colin didn't give up easily. In the weeks after Nora's failed court challenge, he transformed into someone I barely recognized. The man who once ignored my calls now called every evening. The man who shrugged off responsibility now cooked dinners, left flowers, and poured me glasses of wine before I could even sit down. His voice was honeyed, his touch careful, his smile rehearsed. It would have been convincing if I hadn't already seen the truth. One night, I walked into the kitchen to find him stirring pasta sauce, a checkered apron tied around his waist. The sight might have made me laugh months ago, but now it only filled me with unease. "Thought I'd surprise you," he said, flashing me a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "It's your favorite, with fresh basil." I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "You haven't cooked in years." He shrugged, feigning humility. "I guess losing Mom made me realize what matters. Family. Us." The word us hung in the air like smoke, suffocating. "You weren't there when she needed you," I said softly, my voice trembling with the anger I no longer cared to hide. "You let her die alone, Colin. And now you're making spaghetti like that erases it?" The smile faltered. His jaw tightened, but he smoothed his expression quickly, slipping the mask back on. "I know I made mistakes, but I want to make it right. We can start over." start over, as if forgiveness was something you could plate alongside pasta. I left him in the kitchen, retreating to the cottage that night. The cottage became my refuge. During the day, I sorted through Catherine's journals, piecing together the fragments of her life she had hidden from her children. At night, I slept in the worn chair by the window, her words my lullaby. The cottage wasn't polished or perfect. The floorboards creaked, the windows rattled in the wind, the air carried the scent of old paper. But it was real, honest. One evening, I pulled a journal dated 5 years earlier. My fingers traced the careful script.
Colin called again, asked for money. Said it was for a business investment. I gave it to him. I wanted to believe he'd visit if I did. He didn't. Another entry. Nora borrowed jewelry, promised to bring it back. She didn't. When I asked, she laughed. Said I was too old to notice. The words cut deep. Every line revealed the cracks in a family that had crumbled long before I married into it. Catherine's loneliness wasn't an accident. It had been constructed, brick by brick, by the indifference of the people who should have cared for her most. Her journals didn't just tell her story, they gave me mine. 2 nights later, Colin showed up at the cottage. His car crunched over the gravel path, headlights spilling across the wild roses. He knocked softly, his voice low. "Eleanor, can we talk?" I opened the door, cautious, the keys still in my hand. He looked different in the moonlight, tired, desperate. A bouquet of roses hung limply in his hand. "I miss you," he said. "I miss us." I shook my head. "No, Colin, you miss control. You miss being the center." His face twisted. "That's not fair. You think you're so perfect? You think Mom loved you more than me? She was sick, Eleanor. She didn't know what she was doing. She knew exactly what she was doing," I said, my voice steady. "She chose me because I listened, because I was there." Her hands clenched around the roses, petals dropping onto the porch. "We can fix this. We can renew our vows, start fresh. I even found Mom's engagement ring. She would want you to have it." The lie was bold enough to steal my breath. Catherine's ring sat safely in my jewelry box upstairs. "That's not her ring," I said flatly. For a moment, his mask cracked, fury flashing in his eyes. Then he forced a smile, his voice soft again. "The point is, I want to make things right." I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I had been carrying it for days, waiting for this moment. "These are divorce papers," I said, handing them to him, already signed. His face crumpled, then hardened. He tore the papers in half, his voice rising. "This isn't over." I stepped back, Catherine's words echoing in my mind. "Forgive no one. Let them beg. Let them kneel. And when they do, smile, turn, and walk away." I closed the door, leaving him standing in the moonlight, the roses scattered at his feet. That night, I sat at Catherine's kitchen table, the torn papers still vivid in my mind. The cottage creaked softly, its walls holding me steady. I'm not afraid anymore. Not of him, not of them, not of being alone. The floorboards groaned in reply, as if Catherine herself approved. For the first time in years, I felt free. The morning after Colin stormed away from the cottage, I woke to the sound of birdsong drifting through cracked shutters. For the first time in weeks, the weight in my chest felt lighter. Catherine's words, sharp, unyielding, still rang in my head. "Forgive no one. Let them beg. Let them kneel." But beyond the fire of her voice, I also felt something gentler rising inside me, a pull toward rebuilding, toward making this space not just a relic of Catherine's loneliness, but a living testament to her strength. The cottage, for all its secrets, was falling apart. The porch sagged dangerously on one side, the pipes rattled every time I turned the tap, and the roof leaked when rain drummed against it. Yet as I walked from room to room that morning, trailing my fingers along the peeling wallpaper, I didn't see decay. I saw potential. This was her sanctuary, and now it would become mine. I started with the journals. For weeks, they had been my anchor. But now I organized them carefully into boxes, labeling each year. There were decades of Catherine's life preserved in neat handwriting, her thoughts, her observations, her wounds. As I stacked them neatly, I thought about her years as a librarian, the way she had always kept order among stories, even as her own life unraveled. It felt right to give her words the same respect she had once given to others. In the kitchen, I scrubbed until the counters gleamed. I opened the windows, letting in the crisp mountain air, the scent of pine and wild roses replacing the mustiness. Dust motes danced in the sunlight, scattering like tiny stars across the wooden floor. Each task felt symbolic, like I was breathing life back into a house that had been waiting too long to be remembered.
By afternoon, I called a contractor from town. His name was Henry, an older man with kind eyes and a thick Appalachian drawl. He climbed the porch steps, testing the wood with his boots, shaking his head. "Seen worse," he said, scribbling notes on a pad. "This place has good bones. She'll shine again if you give her some love." His words made me smile for the first time in days. "I want it restored," I said. "Not modernized, just strong, warm, like it was meant to be lived in." Henry nodded. "That's what I do best." Within a week, the cottage hummed with the sounds of hammers and saws. The porch was rebuilt, the roof patched, the plumbing replaced. I painted the walls in warm tones, soft golds, deep blues, and earthy greens. Each stroke felt like a promise, not just to Catherine, but to myself. The more I worked, the more the house transformed, shedding its dust and sorrow for something alive. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a wooden chest tucked beneath a faded quilt. Inside were bundles of letters tied with twine, their edges yellowed with age. I sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully untying one bundle. The first letter was addressed to Catherine from her husband, dated decades ago. "My dearest cat," it began. "Every time I open a book, I hear your voice in my head. Every story reminds me of ours. I miss you fiercely, but knowing you're surrounded by stories eases me. Remember, love, even when you're lonely, you are never truly alone." Tears blurred my vision. Letter after letter painted a portrait of a love that had once been fierce, tender, and enduring. Her husband had died years before I met her, but his presence lingered in those pages, a reminder that Catherine had not always been forgotten. Nestled among the letters were photographs. Catherine in her 20s, laughing at a picnic. Catherine holding Colin as a baby, her face radiant with pride. Catherine in her librarian's desk, surrounded by books, her eyes alight with purpose. I traced her smile with my finger, my heart aching. She had been so much more than the quiet, distant woman I had known. It struck me then, this cottage wasn't just Catherine's refuge, it was her story, and now it was mine to tell. When Henry and his crew finished the renovations, the cottage gleamed. The porch no longer sagged, the floors shone, and the windows sparkled in the sunlight. I bought secondhand furniture from local shops, soft armchairs, sturdy wooden tables, shelves to hold Catherine's journals. The house felt alive again, but it wasn't enough just to restore it. Catherine had entrusted me with more than walls and memories. She had entrusted me with her voice. I sat at the kitchen table one night, Catherine's journals spread before me, her words echoing in my mind. Forgive no one. It wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. She had been abandoned, and she wanted her story remembered, not erased. So I made a decision. The cottage wouldn't just be my refuge, it would be a haven for others, those who had been forgotten, overlooked, silenced. A place where no one would die alone, where loneliness wouldn't creep in through the cracks. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew this. Catherine's legacy would not be money or property or even forgiveness. It would be connection, and I would build it. The first step was small. I invited Ruth and Vivian, Catherine's church friends, for tea. They arrived on a bright Saturday morning, their eyes wide as they stepped onto the new porch. "She would have loved this," Ruth whispered, brushing her fingers along the fresh paint. Inside, I poured tea into Catherine's old china cups. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, sunlight spilling across the wood. We laughed, we cried, we shared stories about Catherine, the way she always remembered birthdays, the way she hummed when she read,
the way she made soup when anyone was sick. For hours, the cottage was filled with voices, warmth, and life. And for the first time, I felt what Catherine must have wanted all along: family, chosen and true. That night, I stood outside beneath the oak tree, wild roses blooming at its base. The stars glittered above, sharp against the dark sky. "You're not forgotten," I whispered, my hand pressed to the bark. "Not anymore." The wind stirred through the branches, as though Catherine herself had answered. And I knew then the cottage wasn't just hers. It was ours, and it was only the beginning.
The idea began as a whisper. At first, it was just a thought I couldn't shake while scrubbing the kitchen counters or stacking Catherine's journals. A seed planted by her words, by her loneliness, by the way her own children had turned their backs. No one should leave this world unseen. The cottage had been Catherine's hidden sanctuary, but I wanted it to be more than a secret. I wanted it to be a place where forgotten voices could be heard. I started small. I called Ruth and Vivian again, inviting them for tea on a Saturday afternoon. They arrived with baked goods, their laughter echoing as they carried plates into the kitchen. "This place," Vivian said, looking around with misty eyes. "It feels like Catherine's spirit is still here." "She'd be proud of you," Ruth added, "restoring it, filling it with life again." Their words warmed me, but also lit a fire. Pride wasn't enough. Catherine had spent too many years in silence. I wanted her story to shout. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, a blank notebook open before me. At the top of the page, I wrote Catherine's haven. It felt right, a place of safety, of healing, of memory.
Henry and his crew returned, this time to expand the renovations. We built a wide meeting room from the cottage's old storage space, added long tables and sturdy chairs. We repainted the walls in warm tones, hung curtains that let in sunlight. Local volunteers offered help. A retired carpenter built bookshelves for Catherine's journals, while a young artist painted a mural of wild roses on the entryway wall. The town librarian donated boxes of books. A cafe owner offered to sponsor weekly meals. The more I explained Catherine's story, the more people leaned in, nodding, their eyes soft with recognition. Everyone had known someone like her, someone who had faded quietly, unnoticed. The first gathering was modest, just 10 people sitting around a table, sipping tea. Some were widows, some were older men whose children lived far away. Others were middle-aged neighbors carrying unspoken grief. I shared Catherine's story that night. Not all of it, not the bitterness or the sharpness of her last letter, but the truth of her loneliness and her resilience. "She gave me this cottage," I said, my voice trembling. "But more than that, she gave me a mission." Catherine believed that no one should leave this world unseen, and that's what this place is for all of us. There was silence, then soft nods. One woman wiped her eyes. Another reached across the table, clasping her neighbor's hand. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Word spread quickly. Within a month, Catherine's Haven hosted weekly dinners, potlucks where laughter filled the rooms and strangers became friends. Art classes were added, led by the young muralist. Grief circles formed where people shared memories of lost loved ones, their voices breaking, then steadying as others listened. The cottage no longer creaked with emptiness. It pulsed with life. One evening, as I washed dishes in the kitchen, Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've given Catherine back to us," she whispered. "She's alive here." Her words struck deep. That was it, wasn't it? Catherine wasn't forgotten. Not anymore. Colin, of course, hated it. He showed up once, uninvited, his car tires spitting gravel across the driveway. He stood on the porch, his voice sharp. "So this is what you're doing with my mother's money? Playing hostess to a bunch of strangers?" "They're not strangers," I said, my voice calm. "They're family." His laugh was bitter. "You think this makes you virtuous? You think this makes up for manipulating her?" I held his gaze. "I don't need to prove anything to you. Catherine chose me, and this is her legacy. Not you, not Nora, this." For once, Colin had no reply. He stormed off, his car disappearing into the night. I didn't chase him. Catherine's voice echoed inside me. Smile, turn, and walk away. And I did. Months passed. Catherine's Haven grew. Local papers wrote about it.
calling it a sanctuary in the mountains. Volunteers streamed in. Seniors found companionship. Widows found comfort. And children came to hear stories read aloud from the very journals Catherine had once filled in solitude. 1 year after Catherine's death, we held a celebration under the oak tree behind the cottage. Neighbors brought food, music filled the air, and lanterns glowed as the sun set. I stood before the crowd, my heart full. Catherine's Haven isn't just a place, it's a promise that no one will be forgotten. Applause broke out, warm and steady. As the lanterns rose into the night sky, I felt something I hadn't in months. Peace. Later, I stood alone beneath the oak tree, wild roses blooming at its base. I whispered into the night, "You're still here, Catherine, and you always will be." The wind stirred, cool against my face, and I knew she was.
The first invitation came as an email from Clara. She had forwarded a message from a regional elder care conference in Charlotte. "They want you to speak," Clara explained when I called her, her voice calm but warm. "About Catherine's Haven, about Catherine's story." My stomach tightened. Me? Speak at a conference? I had never stood before a crowd larger than a dinner party. "I don't know if I can," I admitted. Clara's reply was steady. "Eleanor, you already have. Every time you open Catherine's door, every time you tell her story, you're speaking for her. This is no different, only louder." She was right. Catherine had entrusted me with her voice, and voices weren't meant to be hidden. The conference hall in Charlotte was cavernous, its high ceilings humming with the murmur of hundreds of attendees. Social workers, elder care advocates, community organizers. My hands trembled as I stood at the podium, the microphone angled toward me. A slideshow behind me showed images of the cottage, the wild roses on the walls, the mural of Catherine's Haven, neighbors gathered around long tables. I took a breath. "My mother-in-law died alone," I began. My voice wavered, but steadied as I continued. "Not because she had no family, but because her family chose not to be there. Her story is not unique. It happens in silence, behind closed doors, more often than we want to admit." The room stilled, faces turned toward me, eyes intent. I said she left me a key. I hold it up for them to see. A key to her hidden cottage. Inside, I found not just her home, but her truth. Pages of journals documenting years of neglect, indifference, and loneliness. But also her strength, her clarity, her demand not to be forgotten. I spoke of Catherine's Haven, of the weekly dinners, the grief circles, the art classes, of how laughter now filled the rooms where silence once lived. Isolation creeps in quietly. Missed calls, excuses, visits cut short. But connection is loud. It fills rooms. It mends wounds. It keeps memories alive. Catherine's Haven is proof of that, and we need more of it. When I finished, there was silence. Then, slowly, applause. It built, steady and strong, until the hall rang with it. Tears burned my eyes as I stepped down from the podium. I wasn't just speaking for Catherine anymore. I was speaking for all of them, for everyone who had ever been left behind. After the conference, people approached me with questions, stories, offers of help. A social worker from Raleigh asked if she could visit the Haven. A church group from Atlanta offered to fundraise. An editor pressed her card into my hand. "Write a book," she urged. "People need to hear this story." The thought startled me. A book? Me? But as I drove back to Asheville that evening, the idea grew roots. Catherine's journals weren't just private pain. They were testimony, and testimony deserved to be shared. Meanwhile, Colin and Nora's lives frayed at the edges. Colin called less frequently now, though when he did, his voice dripped with false concern. He mentioned money troubles, hinted at wanting to talk things through. I recognized the performance for what it was. A man scrambling after a mask had slipped. Nora's bitterness became public. One evening, I received a voicemail from her. Her words slurred. "I lost my job because of that court case. My landlord's kicking me out. This is your fault, Eleanor. All of it. You stole everything." I didn't return the call. Instead, I slid Catherine's final note from my purse and read it again. "Forgive no one. Let them beg. Let them kneel. And when they do, smile, turn, and walk away." So I walked away. The book took shape over months. Late nights at the cottage, I spread Catherine's journals across the table, weaving her words with mine. I wrote about her life, her neglect,
her strength. I wrote about my own awakening, how Catherine's key had unlocked not just her cottage, but my own courage. It was painful, dredging up each memory, but it was healing too. And when I sent the manuscript to the editor, I felt lighter. On the second anniversary of Catherine's death, the book was published, The Forgotten Key, A Daughter-in-Law's Inheritance of Strength. The launch was held at Catherine's Haven. The community room overflowed with people. Neighbors, friends, volunteers, strangers who had been touched by the story. Ruth and Vivian hugged me tightly, tears in their eyes. "She would be proud," Vivian whispered. The local paper covered the event, their headline reading, "From Silence to Sanctuary, one woman's mission to honor her mother-in-law." I stood beneath the mural of wild roses, signing copies, listening to stories from readers. Catherine's voice was alive in every page, every tear, every laugh that filled the room. Colin remarried quietly in Arizona. Rumors trickled back. His business had failed, money was tight, his charm no longer enough to mask his truth. Nora, I heard, worked nights at a diner, her sharpness dulled by exhaustion. I didn't gloat, I didn't grieve. I remembered Catherine's words, "Smile, turn, and walk away." And so I did. That night, after the launch, I stood alone beneath the oak tree behind the cottage. The lanterns from the celebration still glowed faintly, swaying in the breeze. I placed a bouquet of wild roses at its base, my hand pressed to the bark. "You're never forgotten. Not you, not your story, not anymore." The wind stirred soft against my cheek, and I felt her there, strong, steady, proud. Catherine's Haven wasn't just hers anymore. It was ours. It was everyone's. And I knew then, my voice steady in the night, this was only the beginning. The third anniversary of Catherine's passing dawned crisp and golden. The kind of mountain morning where the air tasted of pine and sunlight poured down like blessing. I stood on the porch of the cottage, no, of Catherine's Haven, watching as neighbors and volunteers bustled in the yard, stringing lanterns between the oak trees and arranging tables draped with wildflowers. What had once been a forgotten house hidden behind blackberry bushes had become a beacon. Children chased one another across the grass, their laughter bright. Older women arranged pies on the tables, while a group of men set up chairs in neat rows. The air hummed with life, a far cry from the silence that had filled Catherine's hospital room the day she left us. I pressed my palm against the porch railing, steadying myself as the memory washed over me. I had stood alone then, holding her hand, feeling it grow cold, alone, abandoned by Colin and Nora, by everyone who should have cared. But I wasn't alone anymore. The Haven pulsed with community, a living legacy built from Catherine's pain and my resolve. Inside, the walls told stories. Catherine's journals lined the bookshelves, preserved with care. Her photographs hung in frames. Catherine as a young librarian. Catherine holding Colin as a baby. Catherine laughing with friends. Volunteers had contributed art, portraits, sketches, poems. The mural of wild roses stretched across the entryway, a bloom of resilience, welcoming everyone who entered. Every inch of the Haven spoke of remembrance, connection, and renewal. As people gathered for the anniversary event, I stood near the front of the meeting room. The chairs filled quickly, faces familiar and new. Ruth and Vivian sat in the front row, hands clasped, their eyes glistening. Clara was there too, her sharp eyes softening when she caught mine. When the room settled, I stepped forward. 3 years ago, I began, my voice steady. I held Catherine's hand as she took her final breath. She left this world in silence, unseen by the people who should have been there. But she left me something, a key, not just to her cottage, but to her truth. I held up the rusted key, its weight familiar now. That key led me here, to Catherine's Haven, a place where no one is unseen, where loneliness is met with laughter, where silence is replaced with connection.
I spoke of the dinners, the classes, the grief circles. I spoke of the book, of the voices that had joined Catherine's, of the ripples her story had created far beyond these mountains. She taught me that legacy isn't money or property, I said, my throat tightening. It's the courage to walk away from betrayal,
and the determination to build something better. Catherine isn't forgotten, and none of you are either. The room was quiet for a moment, then filled with applause. Warm, steady, alive. Later, I walked out beneath the oak tree. Lanterns glowed in its branches, swaying gently in the evening breeze. At its base, I placed a bouquet of wild roses, their petals bright against the earth. "You're still here," I whispered. "In every laugh, every story, every life touched. You'll never be forgotten." The wind stirred through the branches, cool against my skin, and I felt her presence as clearly as I had that day in the hospital. Not fading, not silent, strong.
Life had moved on for Colin and Nora, but in shadows. Colin's remarriage had ended in divorce, his charm no longer currency. Nora drifted between jobs, her sharp edges worn down by bitterness. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. Catherine's words guided me still. Forgive no one. Smile, turn, and walk away. And I had walked far, into a future where their absence no longer defines me. As the evening deepened, music drifted across the haven. Neighbors danced beneath the lanterns, children played, and laughter carried into the night. The house glowed with light, its walls no longer creaking with loneliness, but humming with life. I stood on the porch, watching it all, a quiet smile on my lips. Catherine had left me a key, but what she truly gave me was freedom. Freedom to stand tall, to create, to live without apology. And as I looked at the haven, at the people who filled it, at the stories it now held, I knew her legacy was no longer just mine to carry. It belonged to everyone who walked through those doors. The forgotten had found their place, and so had I.
Catherine's words will stay with me forever. Forgive no one. Let them beg. Let them kneel. And when they do, smile, turn, and walk away. Her story taught me about resilience, courage, and the power of walking away from betrayal. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with others who believe in strength through struggle. Every click helps us keep telling stories that matter, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.